well today too. So we'll be all here today. And our goal is, in the evening service, we'll really leave some time for Q&A. So if you have some questions, jot them down, and then you can hit them up with your questions tonight at the end of the service. We'll save some time for that. So let's start off with a song here, and then we'll turn straight over to Bob Gillespie. What's the number, 23? Number 23. Number 23. He's so great. He's so great and I'm so small. Jesus holds me lest I fall. He's a ruler over all. He's so great and I'm so small. He's so strong and I'm so weak. Jesus came his own to seek. All of nature hears him speak. He's so strong and I'm so weak. He's a shepherd, I'm his sheep. Jesus guards me while I sleep. All his flock he'll watch and keep. He's a shepherd, I'm his sheep. He's my rock and I'm secure. Jesus lives, my hope is sure. He's forever shall endure. He's my rock and I'm secure. Well, it's good to have Bob Gillespie and get torn, Bob or Uncle Bob. I feel wrong to say either one. So, but to you, he's Bob. To me, he's Uncle Bob. And then Aunt Lois here as well, sitting in the back. And make sure you take a look at his books. They're out in that room, and some other things as well, like videos and stuff. So, why don't you come and I won't take any more of your time. Why don't you head and
All right. Well, it's good to be back and see you folks. Greetings from Reasons for Hope. Some people wonder, what's Reasons for Hope all about? Well, we're all about helping people understand why we can trust this book. All of it without doubts, without any, we call them like micro doubts. I'm not sure about this or things like that. So I call this talk, Science Confirms the Bible. Now that's pretty shocking to a lot of people, because most people think that, well, Christianity, the Bible, and then science are always against each other. Well, this is what we get all the time, and then there's a whole lot of Christians that are thinking, I don't want to be a science denier, so I don't want to believe the Bible. I want to believe what science says. And they want to believe in Jesus, so basically what they're doing, they're taking a blind leap of faith against all the evidence that proves you can't believe the Bible, and they just want to believe in Jesus. And that's not a really good way to witness either, is it? Don't worry about all the evidence, right, that proves you can't believe that. Yeah, just believe in Jesus, right? Well, you know what? There's a whole lot of people out there that are saying science says that you can't believe the Bible. One of the biggest things that causes people not to believe the Bible in our Western culture. And if somebody says, science says you can't believe the Bible, well, I like to ask the question. I like to ask this question. Oh, you're saying science says you can't believe the Bible. That's interesting. What kind of science are you talking about? There's two types of sciences. Are you talking about observational science? What's that? Well, that's the kind that you can actually observe. You can test things. You can do experiments on, and you can come to conclusions. And then there's another type of science. It's called like a historical science, where people think, well, this is what I think happened in the past. Can you observe that? What people think happened in the past? No. Can you test it? Can you repeat it? No, it's a belief about the past, right? But then people say, well, then they're trying to look for evidence in science to support their belief. So no, it's not observable. It's not testable. You can't repeat it. It's a belief about the past. So we've got two different types of science. Now, I've gone through it rather quickly, but so I got to give you a test to see if you understand. Are you ready? Okay. How about water boils at 212, at least at sea level anyways, probably not up here. But what kind of science is that? How would you figure that out? What type of science would that be? What? Say it. Yeah, observational. Yeah, you can observe water boiling. You can test it. You can get other people to repeat that test over and over and over again, and you can come to conclusions, right? Okay, how about life evolved in the primordial soup? What kind of science is that? What kind of? Yeah, it's somebody's belief about the past. Nobody observed it. You can't test it. You can't repeat it. It's a belief about the past. How about in the beginning God created it? What kind of science? Yeah, it's a belief about the past. Do we have a belief about the past as Christians? We do, don't we? Yeah. Only, the thing is, we've got an advantage. We've got an eyewitness that was there that told us what happened. Okay, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to talk about that in the next talk. But if you don't want to believe what God says, then you got to have another belief. But the question is, this belief, in the beginning God created, all right, it is a belief about the past. Nobody was there to observe it. You can't repeat it, right? You can't test it. It's a belief about the past. But does that violate science? Does it go against what we observe? There's the question. So what we're going to find out is what we actually observe, science that we observe, it really confirms what God's Word says. All right? It gives you a little introduction of what we're going to talk about. But this is the way they set it up. They say evolution is fact. And then they go like this. You see, evolution, the Big Bang and millions of years of gradual evolution, that's fact, boys and girls. But what you get in church, boys and girls, that's just fiction. You see, we got material stuff, kids. All you get in church is spiritual things. We got real evidence. All you go in church, you go just by faith. Is that kind of intimidating? It is to an awful lot of people, and they're thinking, yeah, and then there's a whole lot of people that are growing up and say, well, I don't believe in God, I believe in science. It's hard to witness, okay? But actually, what we're going to talk about is different types of evolution, and we're going to look at each one of those types of evolution, and we're going to see, does it go along with observational science, or is it a historical science? Is this making sense? The type of things, you got Big Bang, you got, life evolving, life forming, and, evolution. Do those things that they call evolutionary science, is it observational science or is it historical science? That's what we're going to figure out today, right? Okay. Next thing we're going to do is just look at plain evidence of what we see. Does the evidence go along with what God says, or does the evidence go along with what man thinks happened in the past without God? All right, so you ready? Let's take the first one. It's cosmic evolution. What is that? Well, it's being taught that the Big Bang happened billions of years ago, and so that's being taught. Well, this is science, boys and girls. You can't argue. So therefore, you can't believe what the Bible says. That's just by faith. That's fairy tale. You got to go with what science says, right? So the thing is, what do we actually see in nature? Do we see chance, random process, and explosion made everything, or do we see design? Let's take a look and see what some scientists have said down through the years. Einstein says, the more I study science, the more I believe in God. How about that? Have you ever seen this guy on the news or anything? He's Mikio Kaku. He's a famous scientist today. He says, I have concluded that we are in a world made by rules created by an intelligence. What is he saying? He's saying everything that I see, it doesn't look like it happened by chance. It looked like there had to be some kind of intelligence behind it. All right? That doesn't mean he's saying he believes in the God of the Bible. All right? But that's just what he's saying. How about Elon Musk? He's a cool guy. He says, we are almost certainly computer-generated entities living inside a more advanced civilization's video game. You get what he's saying? In other words, the more you look at our world and the whole universe, it's so neatly fit together. It looks like it's designed so well. It couldn't have happened by chance. So I don't want to believe in God, so therefore I believe it was, from an alien race or something like that. Fred Hoyle, now he's the guy that coined the phrase Big Bang anyways. He said, A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with the physics, as well as with chemistry and biology. The facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. In other words, what he's saying is that, well, he's saying the exact thing that God is saying, right? From the invisible things of him, from the creation of the world, they're clearly seen when people look at nature, universe. What do they see? They don't see chance random processes. They see there had to be a designer. All right? So you can learn from this that there's got to be a designer. But if you want to know who that designer is, there's another piece of evidence that God gave us. What's that? That's this book, directly from our Creator. If you want to know how to connect with our Creator, then we have to look at this book to see who Jesus is, because that's how we connect. Well, anyways, cosmic evolution has a Big Bang and all this going on. Has anybody ever observed that? No? Can you test it? Can you repeat it? I hope you can't repeat it, right? Okay. All right. So guess what? We're going to have to move that from the science side over to the belief side. All right? Now, it's okay if they want to believe that. That's fine. That's what theories are. But what I say, don't try to convince me it's science when it's just your belief. Making sense? All right. Well, when we look at the evidence, what do we see? Well, the evidence shows us that there was a designer, and it confirms what God said at the beginning and goes against man's idea, what they think happened in the past. Okay? So that's the first one. All right? Let's take a look at another one. Organic evolution. What people are saying is life began in the primordial soup. Anybody heard of a primordial soup? You've heard of it? Primordial? Never heard of primordial? Okay. Just to be clear, Campbell's does not make the primordial soup. All right. But what's believed is that millions of years ago, there was the oceans and there were molecules swimming around. And these molecules, eventually, over a long period of time, they came together and they formed life. Well, this is life happening all by itself. Now, back in Louis Pasteur's day, people thought that life could just spring out of nothing. And so he did a lot of experiments, a whole lot of experiments, so many so that it became a law that's in our biology textbooks to this day. It's called the law of biogenesis. It says that life only comes from already existing life. So this is kind of fun because you see the scientists will say, well, I go by science, right? And young people might come across somebody that says, I go by science. Yeah, I don't believe in that God stuff. You're just believing fairy tales, right? Well, what you want to do is say, well, look at your biology book. Here's the law of biogenesis. Life only comes from already existing life. That's science. Do you realize you believe something that goes against science? Yeah. So now be kind, but what you want to do is sort of put some holes in their argument, cause them to begin to doubt themselves just a little bit. That's the beginning of witnessing. All right? So that's what people want to say. They go by science, but you Christians, you go by faith. Well, you got an answer for that. That science is the law of biogenesis, and belief is everything happened in the primordial soup. All right. Well, here's one that an interesting scientist. He says the probability of life originating from an accident is comparable to the probability of the unabridged dictionary resulting from an explosion in a print shop. Now, he's a biology professor at Princeton University. Does he still believe that happened, though? I mean, he says, it's like having an explosion in a print shop and you get the encyclopedia, a dictionary. Does he still believe life happened all by itself? Anybody want to guess? Yeah. Well, he does. I know he does. Why? Well, because he calls himself an evolutionist. You see, he has to believe it happened all by itself, even though it's impossible. It goes against science. Why? Well, what's the only alternative? Well, there actually are two, but the only alternative is, you believe the God of the Bible. I don't want to believe that, right? Well, okay, maybe it's aliens. You've heard of that one, right? Yeah, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Well, let's give Darwin a little bit of a break. See, when he was looking at cells and saying that cells could just form themselves, he was using microscopes like that. and he was seeing cells like little blobs. But today we realize that every single cell, living cell, is more complex than we can imagine. I'm going to show you a little clip of how the DNA actually works, and mRNA, you've probably heard of that. And what I want you to think as you're watching this video, if you're an evolutionist, you have to believe all of this, plus so much more, happened all by itself, by chance. Here we go.
With computer animation, we can enter the cell to view this remarkable system at work. After entering the heart of the cell, we see the tightly wound strands of DNA, storehouses for the instructions necessary to build every protein in an organism. In a process known as transcription, a molecular machine first unwinds a section of the DNA helix to expose the genetic instructions needed to assemble a specific protein molecule.
Molecular machine.
Another machine then copies these instructions to form a molecule known as messenger RNA.
Have you heard of that?
When transcription is complete, the slender RNA strand carries the genetic information through the nuclear pore complex, the gatekeeper for traffic in and out of the cell nucleus. The messenger RNA strand is directed to a two-part molecular factory called a ribosome. After attaching itself securely, the process of translation begins. Inside the ribosome, a molecular assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids. These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell and then linked into chains often hundreds of units long. Their sequential arrangement determines the type of protein manufactured. When the chain is finished, it is moved from the ribosome to a barrel-shaped machine that helps fold it into the precise shape critical to its function.
One of those amino acids have to be in the right order. Now, you know what we can do right now? We can just stop and have a play session. Isn't that something? That's going on.
After the chain is folded into a protein,
24/7.
it is then released and shepherded by another molecular machine to the exact location where it is needed.
How about that? Do you know you had machines that were in their cells, like doing things? You know, this is why Richard Dawkins, who wrote the book The Blind Watchmaker, in the beginning of his book, he said, biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. He shouldn't say that, should he? Because what he's saying is all of our evidence, all of our observations show that things had to be designed for a purpose. But I don't want to believe it was a purpose, right? I want to believe it happened all by itself, right? You know, this is what God says about them. Professing themselves to be wise, they become fools. Well, let's take a look at organic evolution, all right? Has anybody observed life forming all by itself to make a cell? No. Can you test it? That's what happened, right? Can you? No. It's not observable. It's not testable. All right. So guess what? Let's just move that over on the belief side of the chart. So that's okay if they want to believe that. But when we look at things like the cell, what do we observe? We observe that they don't go along with what man thinks happened about everything happened by chance. It shows that there has to be a designer. All right, you with me on that? Let's go to another one. How about macroevolution? What in the world is that? Well, this is where one kind of organism gradually changed into another. This is big evolution. Little evolution, you know, the first cell, right? It happened by itself. Okay, we've already figured out it's impossible just to get by itself. But then once you have the first cell, then you have to have new information added to that cell to get it to adapt to different environments. And over millions of years of slow, gradual adaptation, you go from goo to you, right? That's how we got here, right? Yeah. So anyways, let's just take a look and see another law of science that says the law of information science. There's no known law of nature, no known process, and no known sequence of events which can cause information to originate by itself in matter. Every piece of information leads to a mental source, the mind of the sender. Okay? In other words, information doesn't make itself. If you see information, you know it has to come from a mind, somebody that... Isn't it fun being a Christian? You see that actual scientific laws go against what they think. But some people think, well, it's mutations. Yeah, that's it. That's how you get new information. Anybody heard of that? That's the engine of evolution. Well, let's see what Richard Dawkins had to say, because somebody asked him this.
Professor Dawkins, can you give an example of a genetic mutation or an evolutionary process which can be seen to increase the information in the genome?
Now, mind you, he wrote the book called The Blind Watchmaker. He ought to know some examples of new information. Look like he knows any? He doesn't. All right? Now, someone asked him a similar question. Is what we see in the cell, could it point to an intelligence? Here's what he had to say.
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that.
Where
if
did
you
that
look
come from? Where did this intelligent being come from? He designed himself? All right, so, no. See, this is science fiction, folks. But you got to realize there's a whole lot of scientists that are going along with this. Why? Here's the reason. Just because what I showed you, the more they look at the cells, the more they find out it's so complex it couldn't happen by itself. So it's got to come someplace.
We have identified 4,000 planets orbiting other stars. We now believe that there could be over 1 billion Earth-like planets in our backyard in the galaxy. And to assume that we're the only game in town, I think is a little bit presumptuous.
Yeah, interesting, huh? Yeah. In other words, it had to come from aliens.
The world we live in is actually a world created by aliens. If it wasn't for the aliens, we'd still be monkeys or apes. The aliens came down and mixed their DNA up with the DNA of a monkey or an ape. Also, they came down from the sky and they made people think that they were gods when actually they were just aliens. But they are our creator.
So this is the evolutionist dream. If they can finally prove to those silly Christians that there isn't any creator that aliens prove to us, and Jesus is just one big hoax, things like that. Remember, folks, there is somebody that hates God's image bearers and wants to deceive the world. So don't be deceived by the things that you see. I've got a whole talk on that, but I just want to leave it at that. We've got some books that we brought to help young people and adults alone to help understand some of the questions that are going on in our culture. These two books, they're devotional guides for teens. Strongly recommend those. These two, this will go through the real history of what God says. If you believe that, where is it going to take you on the social issues? They can go hand in hand. Now, we got books on science and dinosaurs. We also brought some books on our culture. Have you noticed a culture war going on? I just watched the Olympics, right? That's okay. So we've got a couple books by Dr. David Jeremiah and a couple by Erwin Lutzer that really help you understand what other people are thinking and why Christianity is under such attack. I strongly recommend Christians be readers. That's why we bring them. But anyways, mutations, no, they don't make, so what we observe that mutations don't make any new information. So, well, how about the fossils? Ask anybody, what's the evidence for evolution? What's the first thing they say? Well, it's the fossil record, right? You can't argue with the fossil record. Well, unless you talk to the actual scientists, they know better. This one from Oxford, he says, the gradual change of fossil species has never been part of the evidence for evolution. Did you know that? In any case, no real evolutionist uses the fossil record as evidence in favor of the theory of evolution as opposed to special creation. How about that? Yeah. Colin Patterson wrote a whole book on evolution, and somebody asked him, you got any evidences of fossil evidence that shows gradual changes and things like that? He says, I agree with your comment about the lack of direct illustration of evolutionary transitions in my book. If I knew of any fossilized or living, I would certainly have included them. Yeah. And this one from Harvard, he says, the absence of fossil evidence, he says in a Harvard accent, is for intermediary stages between major transitions in organic design has been a persistent and nagging problem for gradualistic accounts of evolution. It's just a problem. The fossils are a problem for them. You see, what do you have? Well, you've got it all lined up here that the simple ones have to be at the bottom, and as you go higher, you get the more complex ones. That's just a slam dunk. Everybody knows that. The problem is that's not what we see in nature. We see dinosaur bones, mammal bones, fish bones. They're all mixed together. All right? Here's a problem. Here's a geologist taking the students out and says each one of these layers represents millions of years of gradual evolution. And then a bright student says, Professor, look over here. Here's a tree that must have stood there for millions of years while the layers gradually laid up around it. Or maybe that's exactly what we'd expect in a global flood. I'll talk about that in the next talk. But here's what you'd see in a textbook. Here's the family tree for mammals. You got the first mammals down here, and you got the kangaroos, anteaters, and rabbits and squirrels, and so on up here. All right? Now, you have to read the fine print to try to figure out what they're actually saying, because the thick lines represent the actual fossils that you can dig up and put together and make rabbits and squirrels and so on. The dotted lines represent somebody's belief of how it gradually ended up, right? So let's just get rid of somebody's belief, and what do we have? Here's what we have. No matter where you look in the fossil record, kangaroos have always been kangaroos, and rabbits have always been rabbits. Squirrels have always been squirrels. Isn't it fun being a Christian to see that? Yeah. You see, well, here's what they would say. This is a theory of how whales came along. It started with this guy, gradually ended up to this guy. Well, you know what? We see this and we see that, but we don't see any of that. Okay? We see rats and we see bats, but we don't see any in between rats and bats. All right? So this is the problem with evolution. That's why they don't like to talk about them. But your average student says, well, it's, my science teacher says that, it's true, so the fossils must prove it. So there, I don't believe in God. Settled. People don't know things, do they? All right. Well, it's not the mutations. It's not the fossils, all right? So what do we end up with? Well, let's talk about macroevolution. Has anybody observed one type of organism gradually changing into another? Anybody? No, right? Can you test it that that's what happened in the past? You can't repeat that. Well, so it's not observational science. Well, it's a belief. That's okay. We're going to put it over on the belief side. When we look at things like fossils, it's fun. What do we see? Yeah, the fossils go right along with what God says, and they go against what man thinks happened. All right. Well, we got the last one, microevolution. Let's talk about this. Now, this is not a really good term. We don't like this term, microevolution, because the word evolution itself implies evolving upward. not devolving, evolving. To evolve, you got to get new information, right? To go from less complex to more complex. A better term, maybe you've heard this term called natural selection. Okay, you can intentionally select dogs and get different breeds of dogs and things like that. But in nature, there's a natural way that animals will breed together and you get different varieties. So I want to explain that in just a minute. But here's what they say. We see different color moths, and we see different size finch beaks, right? And we see bacteria become antibiotic resistant, right? So there's proof of evolution. All right, well, all that is just proof that there's different varieties of organisms. That's all it is, different varieties of organisms. So let's take a look. See, we're taught that, well, we see different varieties of organisms, therefore evolution must be true. Well, in order for that to happen, you have to have new information. We already talked about that problem, correct? But let's deal with what natural selection is and get that out of the way. Natural selection, what's that? Well, let's say we got some brown rabbits, and these brown rabbits have the genetic capacity when they have baby rabbits to have brown ones, black ones, and white ones. All right? You understand that? Okay. Now let's assume mommy and daddy brown rabbit move way up north where it snows all the time, and they have lots of rabbits. They have black ones, and they have brown ones, and they have white ones. All right? Somebody tell me which ones are going to survive and which ones are going to be lunch. Yeah, the white ones are going to survive. And isn't evolution amazing? The rabbits evolved to adapt to their environment. So you silly Christians, right? I got a question. Is there any new information in that process? No, there's actually a decrease in information. Because what happens now when the two white rabbits get together and they have offspring, they've lost the ability to have black ones and brown ones. They only have white ones. You've got a decrease in information. All right? So it doesn't make any difference if you've got bacteria that can become drug resistant or blind cave fish. Now there's a good example of upward, onward evolution. Why they use that as an example, I have no idea. But it doesn't make any difference. It's always a decrease in information. They're going from a lot of variations in their genome down to less and less and less. All right? Well, let's take a look and see what God said. All right? God says, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind. In other words, there was various kinds of organisms. The organisms could breed within their kind, but they couldn't breed outside of their kind. All right? So that's what that kind of organisms you have. Well, then you've got the flood. Okay? And what happens? You get all these various type of organisms, kinds going on to the ark. Now, back up just a little bit. If evolution were true, you know what we'd expect? A gradual blending of kinds, right? Because it starts with one and it kind of blends, okay? Do we see a gradual blending today that organisms can blend together and breed? No, we don't see that, right? What do we see? We see what God actually said. God created individual kinds, dog kind and dinosaur, T-Rex kind and things like that. And then there was a flood. All right. Kind of a bottleneck because only two from each kind went on the ark, right? Then what you have, they get off the ark, they have lots of offspring, then they divide up into various species and go throughout the whole world. Isn't that what we see? Yeah, we see dog kind with lots of varieties. We see cat kind, lots of varieties, and horse kind, rabbit kind, lots of varieties, but none of them can breed together. All right? So, when we just look at natural selection, it doesn't go along with what man thinks happen. It goes along with what God said happened in his word. So natural selection, is that going to stay on the science side, or we got to have to move it over to the belief side? Anybody want to guess? How many say it stays on the science side? Raise your hand. Okay, got 1, 2, okay. How many say we're going to move it over to the belief side? 1, 2, 3, okay. There's some people never raise their hand. How many people never raise their hand when they're asked? You three, right? You never raise. Okay, got it. All right. Got a question. Natural selection. Can we see different size beaks? Can we see that? Yeah. Can we see, different varieties of rabbits? We can. Can we observe natural selection? We can. So guess what? It's going to stay on the science side. It's observational science, okay? But the thing is, what we observe, does it go along with what God said, or does it go along with what man think happened? Yeah, you see that? It goes along with what God said. So we started out with this, right? That we've got the science, boys and girls. This is fact. What you get in church, that's just belief, right? What do we end up with now? Well, we end up with a whole lot of different information, different observations, and then we have two beliefs about the past. And what we found was, it's fun. The observations go along with what God says, go against what man thinks happens. So really, science does confirm the Bible. All right, I got just a few minutes. I'm going to end in a little video that kind of goes through much of what I covered here, but it goes through very fast. A quick review. So put your seatbelt on. Here goes this fast video.
You hear this one a lot. Science has proven evolution, therefore evolution is true. Since evolution is true and Christians don't believe it, then Christians don't believe science and they aren't rational people. Really, let's put that claim to the test. First off, evolution in the sense that things change is evident. No rational person disputes that. Therefore, rational Christians believe it. We can observe change, but evolution in the sense that life came from non-life and then that life began to randomly generate new genetic information and over time it eventually produced humans is something entirely different and something that quite honestly doesn't hold up against science. In other words, evolution in the sense of molecules to man is not scientifically plausible and therefore should not be viewed as scientific fact. Quite honestly, it is in great opposition to science, that is, observational science, the kind of science we can test and repeat and use our five senses to understand. Science demonstrates that over time, living organisms lose genetic information. They don't gain it. That same science demonstrates that life doesn't arise from non-life. Follow along if you would. Fact 1. There is no known observable process by which new genetic information can be added to an organism's genetic code. None. That pretty much refutes evolution right away because there's no way to go from a fish to an amphibian without adding new information, right? If living organisms cannot produce new genetic information, how can anything gradually change into something of higher intelligence or form or complexity? That is, how can anything evolve from an amoeba to a man without adding new genetic information? The answer, of course, is that it can't. Plain and simple. Now, some have speculated and they have imagined all kinds of things and they brought in artists to produce creative renderings based on guesses, and they have been successful in telling a very convincing story that humans evolved from ape-like creatures. But those are just drawings, people. They're just stories. But what we really observe is humans are humans and apes are apes. Now, if fact 1 buried evolutionary thinking deep into the Precambrian soil, this next fact, fact 2, tosses so much sediment on it that not even the greatest team of paleontologists with the latest subterranean gizmo could dig up the remains. Check this out. Never, again, never has it been observed that life can come from non-life. So here are two major scientific evidences against evolution. I reiterate for clarity, life has never been observed to come from non-life, and there is no known, observable process by which new genetic information can be added to the genetic code of an organism. So, molecules to man evolution doesn't really make scientific sense. Yet we are all here, and life is all around us in various forms. Although evolution cannot account for this, the Bible can. The Bible reveals that the all-powerful, all-knowing, supernatural God created the heavens and the earth out of nothing, and all life according to its kinds, that is, each with its own set of genetic information. So, again, what the Bible reveals makes sense of what we see and understand. Evolution does not. Enough said.
Enough said. Well, to close here, the whole purpose of this is to give you confidence in God's Word, to know it came from our Creator. Believing what God said in His Word is really, really important. Why? It has eternal consequences. Amen? All right. Thank you so much. We'll take a little break, and then I'll give you another talk in the other session. Thank you much. Pastor.
Well, thank you again that you weren't here when we got started. We will, on the Sunday evening session, we'll leave some time for Q&A, so make sure you're here for that. So anyway, we'll start 11 o'clock for normal service time.
So I recommend taking a look at the books back there. It's a donation, cash, check, or credit card by donation. We strongly recommend people be readers.